And welcome back. Now, I've been speaking with Colin Flaherty. He is the award-winning reporter and author of a #1 best-selling book, Don't Make the Black Kids Angry, The Hoax of Black Victimization and Those Who Enable It. We've been talking a lot about how reporters, public officials, activists are denying and excusing a lot of the violence that we've been seeing taking place across the country, at least since Ferguson, in Baltimore, Milwaukee, a lot of states now, it's festering up. And kind of getting to the question of, is this really the proper way to have a discussion about race? I feel like this is a dangerous precedent to set. It's not only harming the Black community there, but also people who might not even be aware that there's any issues, for instance, with the knockout game, telling people it's just an isolated incident.
You know, when you talk about having a conversation about race, I call this epidemic of racial violence and denial the greatest hoax of our lifetime. And part of that hoax is a smaller lie, which is when people say, we need to have a conversation about race. I compile a list of people, and I added to it yesterday in Baltimore, a police lieutenant, people who are fired or suspended from their jobs because they tell the truth about racial violence. Yesterday, a police lieutenant in Baltimore called Black Lives Matter a bunch of thugs. He gets suspended for telling the truth. So there's a lot of that going on out there, and that's why, you know, that's what I do. I just expose the violence denial. There's so much going on out there. You know, you were talking about Milwaukee. There's so many cities where people go, Milwaukee's like that? I mean, there's an enormous amount of Black criminality and violence in Milwaukee. I remember a couple of years ago at the Wisconsin State Fair in Milwaukee, there were hundreds of Black people inside, outside the fair, rampaging through, beating up white people. It was all on 911 calls, which I put on my YouTube channel. So you hear all these people going, hey, these Black people just beat the hell out of my mom. You know, when your mom's getting beat up, you're not going to sit there and pretend it's anything other than what it is. And so there's all these cities. I mean, forget Detroit, Chicago, Baltimore, Washington. What about Milwaukee? What about a couple days ago, Cedar Rapids? 100 to 200 Black people rampaged through the Sweet Corn Festival in Cedar Rapids, shut it down. They attacked police. There's so much of this going on, and there's so little of it being reported outside of myself and a couple other people.
Right. I know the article that you have at the American Thinker actually points out how there was just one outlet that actually reported it in that way about these people rampaging through this state fair. Most of them took the tack of like, oh, these silly kids, they ruin the fair for everyone.
In the local media, they came up with a new phrase. I've heard all the phrases, unruly teenagers, whatever. They called them reckless children.
Right.
They were the ones responsible. This was an episode of large-scale Black mob violence in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, not the first one. So my question to you, Leanne, is if this is happening in Cedar Rapids, what do you think is happening in the rest of the country?
Right. And that's, you know, something that you've also pointed out is that they are really just pushing this narrative that there's a war on Black people and it's being, the cops are the main predators there, while the media is ignoring this tsunami of Black violence against cops and actually not going to the police officers themselves and saying, you know, what are you having to deal with on a daily basis? Why is this so dangerous for you? And then, of course, there is the whole issue of the statistics that are completely irrelevant.
You know, the cops in this country are victims of racial violence, harassment, and even murder on a daily basis from Black people. When a cop rolls into a Black neighborhood, the amount of abuse they get is enormous. But you turn on a TV or pick up a newspaper and you read the opposite, that somehow Black people are always the victims of white racism. I mean, Hillary and Bernie just spent the last year, you know, that's all they talked. That was 20 to 25% of what they talked about in their debates in public forums, white racism. So this is the greatest lie of our generation. That's the bad news. The good news is, because of people like you and Alex and YouTube, lots and lots of people are seeing the enormous difference between what is said in their mainstream media and what really happened. And I think we're picking up a lot of that now.
Right. And, you know, going back to these statistics a little bit, obviously, we know on the one hand, they're skewed because police officers aren't even required to keep record of people who are killed. A lot. I know states like Florida, they're not even required to do that. But at the same time, we also know there is the whole snitches get stitches epidemic. And so people aren't even reporting instances of crime when it's happening in their own communities. I mean, Chicago, perfect example. People are actually shooting children at barbecues and picnics and things, and then the families are so afraid or they don't want to work with the police, they don't even go after someone who's actually killed their child. So there's that whole thing of sort of protecting the community and not being a snitch. So we don't even know what the real crime statistics are.
See, that's exactly right, because we know that they're bad. We know that black criminality is wildly out of proportion when compared to white and Asian criminality. We know black on white crime is way greater than white on black. Okay, the numbers are really bad, whatever they are. But then you throw in stitches for snitches. What about witness intimidation? And the district attorney in Philadelphia and Baltimore and in Milwaukee, they all say that every shooting they get, it's involved. Witness intimidation is involved. The guy who died, by the way, the guy who died in Milwaukee, he was busted for witness intimidation 6 months ago in a shooting. So we don't, and then there's such a thing called Bronx juries where black juries tend not to convict black defendants. As bad as the black crime problem is in America, statistically, it's actually way worse for the reasons you just gave.
Right. And that's where I think that not being truthful with reporting and protecting the so-called class, because maybe you think it's less racist of you to not be truthful in your reporting. I personally think that that's absolutely racist. There's plenty of black people out there that can look at the news objectively and say that has nothing to do with me. I mean, it seems as though we've seen, many, many decades ago, black families were doing really well, good income, good education. There were many accomplishments. Something happened. Now we're seeing this sort of welfare. They're only pushing out the sort of ghetto culture, the hip hop culture. Perfect example, Dr. Ben Carson was like right there neck and neck with Donald Trump. And the black community kind of said, well, he doesn't represent us because he doesn't know this particular rap lyric. And I'm like, are you kidding? He literally started from the bottom and now he is a multimillionaire neurosurgeon. Why doesn't he represent the black community? So what happened? And I think, Milwaukee's a perfect example, a Democrat-run city for more than 100 years. It's this divide and conquer of white versus black where they want to take it to the suburbs. But your average white person isn't the one that's setting up these policies, keeping these people down.
The reporters, so I always write about two things. I write about the violence and I write about how the media covers it. But sometimes I think the reporters are overplaying their hand. Like I remember during Ferguson, I did a lot of stories on this. You'd have these people running down the street, throwing Molotov cocktails, shooting at cops. Then the reporters, that would be the B-roll. Then the reporters are looking into the camera and telling you that the protest was largely peaceful. And everybody at home is going, that's not largely peaceful. So I think they're overplaying their hand. And you can tell that in all these newspapers that are going out of business, the New York Daily News. You can't even sell, nobody will even buy that. They sold Newsweek for $1. So I think that these guys are losing, it's funny, they're losing their audience, but their reaction to losing their audience is doubling down on what caused them to lose their audience in the first place.
Right, exactly. Excusing the mob violence that's happening, saying that riots are the voice of the unheard, which of course Martin Luther King famously said. But that's like a totally different story here because they're rioting over their criminal buddies, not over the fact that the reason why they're being held down is because of these terrible policies that have been put in place, controlling their cities, keeping them down.
It's hard for a lot of people to get their minds around the fact that people who run these chocolate cities like Baltimore, Memphis, New Orleans, other places, the criminals are more popular than the cops. So when they look at a black criminal, they don't see a criminal, they see a victim of white racism. And I mean, Stephanie Rawlings was a great example last year when she said we're going to give the rioters space to destroy. We see a lot of that. New Orleans, Memphis. There's so much. It's all about black victimization, which is the greatest hoax of our lifetime.
Exactly. And of course, as long as you see yourself as a victim, you can never rise above and become a conqueror.
That's the truth, isn't it? Yeah.
Colin Flaherty, thank you so much for joining us today. ColinFlaherty.com. We'll be sure to have you back on the show soon.
Network.